High Frontier 4 is an epic game of space industrialization for up to 5 players, rooted in real science, with a sandboxy feel. It's a race game in which your best laid plans will frequently go up in flames, and you'll be rewarded for adapting and creative thinking to make the most of your luck. The box comes with several variants, but this instructional video covers the core game with the politics module that's included in the box. Lay out the board, give each player a playmat, get the 6 crew cards and deal 1 to each player. Put the rest back in the box. Each player chooses one of the 2 sides to play with. Each crew has a unique special power. Then the player takes the following components of the matching colour. 2 rocket figures, 1 for the map and 1 to mark your thrust. 9 claim discs. 7 factory cubes. 7 colony domes. You also need a wet and dry mass chit, 2 outposts, and 6 aqua. Aqua serves as both currency and rocket fuel. Separate the patent decks into thrusters, robonauts, and refineries, and the supporting cards, radiators, reactors, and generators. Put an aqua on each of the start spaces on the exploitation track. Put the glory chits on the board and, if you're playing with 3 or more players, the heroism chits. Put out the Sol Sunspot cycle, and put 4 busted sight discs in the middle. The person whose crew card letter is closest to A is the start player and puts a factory cube on start. Finally, put out the Sol Political Assembly if you're using it, put the gold star in the middle to make centrist the active law, and each player puts 1 factory cube into the ideology of their player colour. The big neoprene playmat is available separately. Through the game, you'll land on sites, claim them if you're lucky, build factories, and build colonies in that order. At the end, you get 1 point for each of these 4 types of tokens you have on the board. You'll also get bonus points for each factory depending on its stock value at the end of the game. For example, if you have the only S factory, it's worth 8 bonus points, but if there are 3 or more on the board, each is worth 4 bonus points. Colonies are worth 1 bonus point if they're on an astrobiology site, or 2 on a submarine site. During the game, if you are the first to land humans on a site in one of the heliocentric zones, your crew gets that glory chit. The chit is worth 1 point unless your crew gets it home, then you can flip it for more points. That's all the ways of scoring points: your rocket, claims, factories, colonies, factory bonuses, colony bonuses, and glory chits. If you're playing with the politics module, the active law at the end of the game might change the value of one of those scoring methods. Oh, there's one extra thing I didn't mention. In games of 3 or more players, players can at any time vote to award one of the 4 heroism chits to give 2 extra points to a player who has suffered a particularly dramatic disaster. Each turn in any order, you can move your rocket once if it's on the map, do 1 operation, and as many free actions as you like. There's a list of operations and a list of free actions on the player aid. In both cases, ignore the blue text and the bottom 4 operations, as they relate to expansion modules. So basically, each turn is move once, then do 1 operation, or do 1 operation, then move once. After each player has had a turn, the sunspot cube advances, representing a year passing. Each time the cube passes an event threshold, roll a dice and apply the event as shown. Each time the cube passes the seniority threshold, remove a disc, and when the last disc is removed, which is after 48 turns, the game is over. In general, you're trying to buy combinations of cards that work well together, then race to claim some easy points, then build factories, which will probably require many trips and rescue missions, then use those factories to build better rocket parts so you can set up more ambitious missions from space. At the start of the game, you'll participate in auctions to get cards into your hands, and you'll sell cards to make aqua. From your hand, you'll boost a stack of cards into low Earth orbit, or LEO. From LEO, you'll launch a rocket and move it through space. Once your rocket is out there, you'll claim glory by being the first to land humans in a heliocentric zone. You'll use a robonaut to try and claim sites. I say try, because for these size 1 sites, you have to roll a 1 to get it. Any other results, and you put a busted site disc on it to show it's barren. You need a 1 or 2 to get a size 2 site, a 1, 2, or 3 for a size 3, and so on, with size 6 plus sites being a guaranteed success. Once you've got a claim, you can decommission a robonaut and refinery on the site to build a factory. Once you've got a factory, you can decommission crew on the site to build a permanent colony. Factories are very useful. They make it easier to land on or launch from sites and quicker to refuel. You can also use factories to build way better versions of your rocket parts out in space, as long as the card's letter matches the site's letter. Let's look at the cards. All the cards have a mass. Lighter cards are better because you'll need less fuel to get them off Earth. All the cards have a rad hardness. The higher the better because they're less likely to break when you fly through radiation belts. Many cards require supports, which means they won't work unless those supports are in the same stack. So, for example, this thruster requires an E-type generator. Here's a generator that's both E and capacitor type, but it needs an X-type reactor and one therm of cooling. Here's a reactor that's both X and bomb type, and here's a radiator that provides one therm of cooling. Now, if you add this robonaut to the stack, it already has a reactor support. Reactors and generators can be shared. But it needs another therm of cooling, and that can't be shared, so I'll turn this radiator to its heavy orientation. Okay, enough about supports, let's talk thrusters. Thrusters make rocket go. Actually, any card with a blue or grey thrust triangle can make your rocket move. This number represents the rocket's base thrust, which means how many burns of fuel you can do in one turn, and also what size of site you can land on, which is any site smaller than that number. This number is how many steps of fuel each burn costs, so the lower the better. Those are the important bits. You might also have a pushable icon, which means the base thrust can be boosted remotely by the power sat ability on the ESA crew card, a solar icon, which means your base thrust is affected by how near the sun you are, or an afterburner icon, which means you can spend 1 or 2 extra fuel steps to add 1 to your base thrust and get a free therm of cooling into the bargain. Finally, you might have a ballerina icon, which gives you a free pivot. Now, robonauts. Robonauts twin up with refineries to make factories. They also have an ISRU icon on them. Your crew card has one too. ISRU icons let you prospect to try and claim sites, and let you refuel out in space. There are 3 types of ISRU icon. Buggies let you drive around the planets that have multiple sites, and they give you a free reroll for prospecting. Missiles let you prospect, no frills, and ray guns let you prospect without landing from 1 space away. Finally, all of the cards have a letter on them. If you have a factory on a site with a matching letter, you can produce that card in space on its black side. Income fundraise. Take 1 aqua. If you're playing with politics, you also place a factory cube on the political assembly of your colour or where you already have a cube, then you can move 1 cube to an adjacent spot, and then move the active law to the ideology with the most cubes. The active law tweaks the rules according to the text. Research auction. Auctions are how you get new cards into your hand. You can't initiate or participate in an auction if you have 4 or more cards already in your hand. Pick a card to auction. If that card requires supports, take the top card from each of those support decks, whether or not the icons match. That batch of cards will be auctioned. You can start the bid at 0, and players just shout out bids until no one's willing to go higher. 2 people can bid the same amount. If there's a tie, the auction initiator wins, or chooses who wins. Winner pays the aqua they bid to the auction initiator, or the initiator pays it to the bank. Free market. Sell a white card from your hand for 3 aqua, or a black card from LEO for its stock value. Boost. This is how you get cards from your hand into space. Put as many cards from your hand as you want into your LEO stack, paying 1 aqua to the bank for each unit of mass you're boosting. So this stack from earlier would cost 6 aqua to boost. Site refuel. This is how you refuel a rocket out in space. You need an ISRU equal to or lower than the number of hydration droplets on the site you're on. Calculate hydration minus ISRU plus 1 and add that much fuel to your rocket. Alternatively, if your rocket is at one of your factories, just add 7 fuel. Or if you have a Pac-Man icon on one of your rocket's cards, you can use the air eater operation to refuel in the atmosphere of a planet when your rocket passes through an aerobrake space. Prospect. This is how you claim a site, so you can later build a factory there. You need an ISRU equal to or lower than the number of hydration droplets on the site. If you've got that, roll the dice. If the result is equal to or lower than the site's size, your claim is successful. Otherwise, it's busted. Industrialize. This is how you build a factory. Bring a refinery and robonaut to a site, plus any generator or reactor supports they need, and decommission those cards to build a factory. ET production. This is how you make better rocket parts out in space. You must have a factory. Take a card from your hand with a matching letter and put it on its black side at that factory. Use an outpost slot. As a separate operation called delivery, you can magic that black card back to your LEO slot. Count the number of zones from the factory to Earth, times 2, plus 1 if the factory is on a size 8 or bigger site, and pay that much aqua. Create a rocket stack from your cards in LEO and fuel it, 1 aqua per step of fuel. Add up the mass of the cards in the rocket stack, and that's the rocket's dry mass. Use the wet mass marker to show how much fuel you've added on top of that. If I needed to carry fuel into space, I could also add fuel tanks from my aqua supply, but each fuel tank makes my rocket 1 unit heavier. The rest of these actions you can do as many times as you like on your turn. Swap cards between co-located stacks. You can leave up to 2 stacks of cards in space with the outpost markers, and you can freely switch which stack is your active rocket rather than an outpost. So at any given time you can have up to 4 stacks of cards out, plus your hand. Convert fuel tanks into fuel and vice versa. Decommission a crew at a site with a factory to build a colony. Steal a claim if you're playing with the Taikonauts or during a solar anarchy event. Load a glory chit if you're the first to land humans in a heliocentric zone. If you have a factory or an ISRU icon, you can load up your rocket with infinite dirt fuel, but only grey thrusters can use dirt fuel rather than water fuel. If you have a grey thruster, you can also feed it engine parts. Add fuel according to the mass of cards in the thruster's stack that you decommission. You can jettison fuel, follow the black line down. Or decommission cards. Decommissioning means return them white side up to your hand, except crew which go to LEO. You can outright discard cards, returning them to the bottom of their patent decks. You can also discard factories and claims, unless they have a colony on them. Repair a glitch if a crew or colony is in the same place as the glitched stack. What's a glitch, you say? One of the sunspot events makes you put a glitch onto one of your stacks. A glitch remains forever unless a human fixes it, crew or a colony. Many of the operation actions and free actions are a glitch trigger, shown with a red circle on the player aid. If a glitched stack performs a glitch trigger action, roll the dice and decommission all the cards that have exactly that rad hardness. You need to do 3 things to prepare for moving your rocket. Check your mass, activate a thrust triangle, and calculate your thrust. Let's use our rocket stack from earlier. Check mass. Its dry mass is 6. Let's say I'd loaded it with 3 fuel, so its wet mass is 9. When loading fuel, you follow the black numbers. When spending fuel, follow the black line. Activate a thrust triangle. My thruster has its supports in place, so it's working. Calculate your thrust. It's got a base thrust of 3. Minus 2 because it's modified by this icon. Minus 1 because of its weight class equals 0. That's no good, so let's jettison some fuel. Now there's no weight class modifier, so our thrust is 1. That means we can do 1 burn this turn, but we can't land anywhere because there are no size 0 sites, unless we do an aerobrake or factory-assisted landing. Now I'm ready to move. 1 burn with this thruster costs 2 steps of fuel. I can move as far as I like along these lines, and I can stop at any Hohmann point or any circle. Each time I enter a pink spot, I have to do a burn, which consumes fuel. So, with my allocation of 1 burn this turn, I can make it this far before I have to stop. Then, next turn I could continue in a new direction. You can change direction for free at any circle. If you want to change direction at a home point without waiting a turn, you can do 2 burns or use a pivot if you have one. So, from here, with this engine, I can get to Mars in 1 turn like this. Change direction for free, hazard roll. If I roll a 1, my ship blows up, or I can pay Control Center 4 aqua to work overtime and avoid having to roll for the hazard. Change direction for free, spend my 1 burn, which is 2 steps of fuel. Use Mars's gravity to get a free extra burn. Error brake down here, which uses my free extra burn. Error brake is a hazard roll again. And finally, error brake down onto the planet. Ah, my ship exploded. The whole stack goes back into my hand. Should have paid to avoid that hazard. If I'd used a different thruster and had, say, 11 thrusts this turn, I could have landed on any site smaller than 11 for free, unless it had a lander burn icon, in which case you have to spend 1 step of fuel to do a powered landing. The last type of spot is radiation belts. If you enter one of these spaces, roll a dice, subtract your net thrust, and all the bits of your ship with a lower rad hardness are decommissioned. This might mean your rocket is stranded in space without a thruster, and you need to mount a rescue mission. Turn 1. The yellow player puts this solar sail up for auction. It doesn't require any supports, so it gets auctioned by itself. Player 1 bids nothing. Player 2 wants it and bids 3 aqua. Player 1 also bids 3 aqua. Player 2 bids 4 aqua. Player 1 passes, and since player 1 initiated the auction, the payment goes to player 1, and the solar sail goes to player 2. Now it's player 2's turn. Player 2 takes immediate advantage of his thruster and boosts it into orbit. Since it has no mass, it costs no money. Player 2 can then create a rocket out of his crew and that thruster. The rocket goes into LEO on the map, and player 2 can immediately move that rocket. So to move, first check mass. The total mass of the rocket is 1. That's the dry mass. He's putting no fuel into it, so the wet mass is the same. A base thrust of 0, plus 2 for the weight class, plus 0 for proximity to the sun. That's a net thrust of 2, which means he can do 2 burns this turn. Red starts on LEO, uses 1 burn through this cycler. The solar sail is immune to the belt roll, but he's got a roll for the crew. Okay, he's safe. Uses a 2nd burn through this Sol Earth Lagrange and changes direction here. Changes direction at this Sol Earth Lagrange and again here, and finishes at the Sol Venus Lagrange. That's the end of the first turn, so the turn marker moves on and a solar event happens. In this case, anarchy, which is not likely to have an effect at this point in the game. Player 1 puts this robonaut up for auction. It needs 2 supports, so the auction includes the top cards from those 2 support piles, even though in this case the icon doesn't match. Player 1 bids 2. Player 2 only has 2 aqua, and so won't be able to outbid. Therefore, player 1 wins and pays the bank, since he initiated the auction. Those 3 cards go into hand. Player 2 now wants to move again. Check mass. Mass is still 1 and there's no fuel. Then calculate thrust. A base thrust of 0, plus 2 for the weight class, plus 1 for proximity to the sun. That's a net thrust of 3, which means he can do up to 3 burns this turn and land on a site of size 1 or 2. So goes back to this L5S, changes direction this way, uses 1 of the 3 burns here, uses a 2nd of the 3 burns here, changes direction here, uses the free pivot that's available on the solar sail here, uses the 3rd burn here, and then has to roll for this rapid spin hazard. And he's safe, so he can land on Hathor and grab the Venus Glory chit for getting humans into the Venus zone. He still has to do an operation, so he's going to do the fundraise operation. Take 1 aqua, add a factory cube, move a factory cube, and he chooses not to change the active law. That way, he's got mishap insurance. Now the turn marker moves on, and it's player 1's turn. Player 1 has less than 4 cards, and so can initiate an auction. Player 1 auctions this thruster, which comes with this support, and bids 2. Player 2 lets him have it, so he pays the bank. Player 1 now will not be able to participate in any auctions until he has fewer than 4 cards in hand. Player 2 grabs that opportunity, puts this card up for auction, which comes with this support, an excellent combination, and since player 1 can't bid, he gets it for free. And now player 1 will move his rocket. Check mass. Mass is still 1 with no fuel. Activate thruster, the solar sail again. Calculate thrust. Starts with a base thrust of 0, plus 2 for the weight class, plus 1 now for being in the Venus zone. Comes off the planet, has to do another hazard roll. Safe, uses the first of 3 burns to enter this spot. Uses the free pivot from the solar sail here. Free change of direction here, free change of direction here, and lands on Apophis. First humans to land in the Earth zone, so loads the Earth glory chit. The turn marker moves on again. Player 1 uses the free market action to sell a card for 3 aqua. Player 2 takes advantage of the fact that player 1 still can't bid to take this refinery, which comes with this reactor, for free. And then moves his rocket. Still a mass of 1, dry and wet. Activate the solar sail thruster, which is a base thrust of 0, plus 2 for the weight class, plus 0 this time for proximity to the sun, is a net thrust of 2. Launches, changes direction here, uses the free bonus pivot from the solar sail here, goes through this burn, that's 1 of 3 burns, has to roll for this hazard, safe, lands on Eros, and picks up this glory chit, and will then try and get all of these glory chits home. That's the end of that turn. And this time, the solar event is Inspiration. So, the top card from each patent deck goes to the bottom. Now player 1 is going to boost the thruster, the reactor to support the thruster, the robonaut, which is supported by the same reactor, and supported by the radiator. That's a total mass of 1, 2, 3, 4. So that costs 4 to boost. He'll then immediately make a rocket out of that, which has a dry mass of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with the crew. And he's going to load it with 3 fuel. So the wet marker goes on 8. He's then going to calculate net thrust, which is 2, plus 0 for his weight class. He can do up to 2 burns and land on a size 1 site. He's got an ISRU of 2 on his robonaut, so he's going to aim for Deimos, and then he'll be able to refuel to see if he gets lucky with a claim and head for the Geflon family, and he should definitely be able to get at least a couple of claims there. Starts on LEO, goes through this cycler, enters this radiation belt. He rolls a 5, minus the net thrust of 2 is 3. If it was season red, he'd have to add 2 to that result. But as it is, the result of the belt roll is 3. Any cards with a rad hardness of less than 3 get decommissioned. Unfortunately, that's the robonaut and the radiator. They go back into his hand, and now since he's lost his robonaut, he won't be able to carry out his initial plan. He's going to have to mount another mission to get the robonaut and the radiator back out there. Nevertheless, the movement can continue. Uses a second burn here, past the Sol Earth Lagrange, and stops at this Homan point. Now for his operation, player 2 will sell this refinery so that he has less than 4 cards and can participate in auctions again. 3 aqua. And will then try and get all of these glory chits home. So the mass is still 1. Wet mass is still the same. Activate the solar thruster. Base thrust is 0. Plus 2 for the weight class. Minus 1 now for the distance from the sun. That's a net thrust of 1. He can only do 1 burn this turn. Launches and enters this hazard. Safe, proceeds, uses the one burn to enter this pink spot. Keep going. Change direction here and stop at this Homan point.
I know Kung Fu.